Did you know there is a moment just before sunrise at Giza when the desert holds its breath? The sky is still violet, the air is cold, and the first light of the sun slides along the horizon like a blade. Out of that fading darkness, the Great Sphinx begins to appear. First the paws, then the massive lion's body, then, at last, the face. It looks less like a monument waking up and more like something remembering. For thousands of years, we have been told a simple story about this stone guardian. Most of us grew up believing the Sphinx was carved around 2500 BCE, a proud royal monument built by the Pharaoh Khafre, a statue with his face watching over his pyramid, nothing more mysterious than a symbol of power and kingship. But old legends tell a different story, and the rock beneath the Sphinx's paws may be whispering that the familiar timeline is wrong. What if this face was already ancient when the pyramids were new? What if the Sphinx was not the beginning of Egypt's greatness, but the last witness of something even older? Imagine this creature staring east as the sun rose over a very different Nile, in an age when rain still carved rivers into the plateau and the desert we know had not yet fully formed. Geologists who study the Sphinx's body see deep, vertical weathering in its enclosure walls, patterns that look less like sand and wind and more like centuries of heavy rainfall. That kind of climate belongs to a much earlier Egypt, thousands of years before Khafre. The head, strangely small for such a massive body, is less eroded, as if it was recut in dynastic times. Did later pharaohs reshape an already ancient lion into their own image, claiming a guardian they did not build? Welcome back. This is a place for quiet stories from the wizarding world. The paths Canaan never walked, the choices that might have changed everything. Here, we take a single moment and turn it slightly. We follow the consequences slowly, carefully, year by year. If you enjoy these long, immersive journeys into alternate magic, consider subscribing and settling in. Now, let's start. According to the stories, Egyptian priests spoke in hushed tones about a first time Zep Tepi, a golden age before known history. Some researchers believe the Sphinx may have watched the end of that forgotten civilization, standing as a silent witness while its temples, schools, and rituals vanished beneath sand and flood. If that is true, then the real builders of the Sphinx are missing from our history books. Beneath its paws, scans hint at hidden cavities and chambers, sealed doors in the bedrock that the later pharaohs could not erase, erosion that does not match the official date, proportions that do not match the supposed builder, alignments that may once have pointed to the stars of Leo in a sky from 12,000 years ago. What kind of knowledge could be locked inside a monument that old? Most importantly, what if the Sphinx is not just a statue, but a timeline in stone, a guardian marking the gate between two worlds, the Egypt we know and a civilization we have forgotten? If we can read its scars, its hidden chambers, its silent gaze toward the horizon, we may be forced to rewrite when civilization truly began. And we'll find out together how far back that story really goes. What has the Sphinx really seen? So what has the Sphinx really seen? Did you know that even among Egyptologists, the Sphinx is treated like an anomaly, a problem no one fully solves? Who carved the first Sphinx out of the living bedrock? Why does its great lion body look as if it has been drowned in ancient rain, its sides carved into deep vertical waves instead of the soft sandblasting we see on nearby walls. And why did Egyptian priests speak in hushed tones about an age before history, Zep Tepi, the first time, and guard it with oaths of silence? For thousands of years, visitors have walked past this monument and assumed it was just another royal project, a giant billboard for a pharaoh. But old legends tell a different story. The body is heavily weathered, eroded in a way geologists like Robert Schoch argue points to centuries of heavy rainfall, not desert winds. That would push its origins back into a wetter Nile climate, long before the Sahara became the desert we know. So whose hands shaped that first lion body? And what kind of knowledge were they trying to lock in stone before the climate or a flood erased their world? According to the stories, there was a forgotten age when gods and shining beings walked with early kings. Egyptian texts call it Zep Tepi, the first time, a golden era that ends in catastrophe and slow decline. Most importantly, what if the Sphinx is not a mythic symbol of that age, but an actual survivor from it, a guardian that remembers a civilization lost to flood, fire, or slow erasure, standing watch as later dynasties built their pyramids around a relic they barely understood? That is the promise of this episode. We'll test the radical idea that the Sphinx is not just older than Khafre, but a time capsule from the first time itself. We'll find out together whether its scars, its star alignments, and its hidden chambers point to a forgotten chapter of human history. This channel is not just a tour of ruins, it is a continuing mystery school. We do not only list dates and dynasties, we walk the initiatory path through myth, stone, and star to see what the ancient schools, pharaohs, and priests were really doing at Giza. Imagine the plateau not as a cemetery, but as a training ground for the afterlife, with the Sphinx as the gatekeeper at its edge. So here is how this journey unfolds. First, we move through mainstream Egyptology, the official story of Khafre, quarry marks, and royal propaganda. Then we descend into geological anomalies, the rain-worn enclosure, the recarved head, the shifting Nile climate. From there, we look up to star alignments and the theory that the Sphinx once faced its own reflection in the constellation Leo around 10,500 BCE. We will peer beneath its pores, into tales of underground chambers. And finally, we enter the belief system that turned this stone lion into a guardian of the underworld and a test for the soul. If you stay with this journey, by the end you will not just know dates and theories, you will see the Sphinx the way the old priesthood did, as a test, a teacher, and a witness, waiting to see who is ready to ask the right questions at its gate. From tourist postcard to temple guardian. To most of the world, the Sphinx is a postcard, a backdrop, a stone celebrity you visit after the pyramids, snap a photo with, and then leave behind in the desert heat. Did you know the official story behind that postcard is actually quite simple? According to mainstream Egyptology, the Great Sphinx was carved in the 4th dynasty around 2500 BCE from a single limestone outcrop on the Giza plateau. The usual script says it bears the face of Pharaoh Khafre, the same ruler credited with the second pyramid. Workmen, we are told, simply shaved the bedrock into a lion's body, added a royal headcloth, and left us this gigantic monument to one man's power. Over the centuries, the desert tried to erase it. Wind pushed waves of sand into the enclosure until the Sphinx was buried up to its neck. Pharaohs like Thutmose IV cleared it, leaving stelae between its pores. Roman governors dug it out again. Modern archaeologists followed with measuring tapes and cameras. Each age uncovered the same silent profile, took its measurements, then walked away believing the mystery was solved. Today, most visitors stand at the fence, phones raised, the Sphinx reduced to a symbol of mystery without a voice. It becomes a background for vacation photos, a stone mascot for ancient Egypt, sitting politely beside the pyramids, while tour guides repeat dates and dynasties. We rarely ask what kind of knowledge a being like this was meant to guard, or why it was placed exactly here, at the very edge of the Nile's green life and the desert's endless death. But the older Egyptian way of seeing it was very different. For thousands of years, priests and initiates did not treat the Sphinx as a statue. They approached it as a living guardian, part lion, part human, standing at a threshold. Behind it, the fertile fields and temples of the Nile. In front of it, the open desert and the road of the dead. Above it, the turning sky that mapped the journey of the soul through the duat. In this older vision, the Sphinx is a question made of stone. Old legends tell a different story than the guidebooks. A story in which the Sphinx does not speak in riddles of words, but in riddles of transformation. To pass its gate is not to answer a clever puzzle. It is to become someone else, the kind of person the underworld will recognize and allow through its gates. According to the stories of later mystery schools, initiates came to beings like this to be tested. The Sphinx watched the horizon of their fear. It measured their stillness. It listened for the inner silence that real rituals of rebirth require. Most importantly, it stood as a warning. Do not approach the hidden chambers of the afterlife unprepared. But if the Sphinx is a guardian, what is it really guarding? A tomb? A tunnel? A memory from a time before the pharaohs? To even begin to answer that, we have to stop looking at the postcards and start reading the body itself. The eroded walls around it, the scars in its stone, and the strip of sky it stares into at dawn. Because those scars and that sky may be telling a story that breaks the timeline of history wide open. If those scars and that sky hint at a broken timeline, they also hint at something else. Not everyone was allowed to listen. Did you know that for thousands of years most people in Egypt would have seen the Sphinx the way tourists do today, at a distance? Farmers on the floodplain, craftsmen hauling limestone, children chasing goats along the desert edge might glimpse that silent face at dawn, glowing red in the first light, but they did not walk between its pores. That was a different world. Old legends tell a different story about who crossed that invisible line. According to the stories, only a narrow circle approached the Sphinx as a working sacred instrument. Pharaohs in embroidered linen, high priests carrying incense and palm ribs, and a handful of carefully chosen initiates. To everyone else, the Sphinx was a boundary. To them, it was a gate. Egypt itself was built on layers of training. At the base were scribal schools, where boys spent years copying signs until their wrists ached, learning to calculate grain, measure fields, and keep the kingdom's accounts. Above them were the temple schools, where priests memorized hymns, star cycles, and the precise gestures of the rituals that kept the gods and the Nile in balance. But what really happened beyond that second layer? Hidden behind oaths of silence was a third curriculum, hinted at in those 42 sacred books Clement of Alexandria later described, a mystery training reserved for those being prepared to walk the duat while still alive. Here, knowledge was not just written, it was carved into the body and the nerves through ordeal. Here, the Sphinx was not a monument, it was a teacher. Imagine the Sphinx precinct not as an open plaza, but as a restricted zone. At dawn, processions moved between the Valley Temple and the causeway, torches flickering against polished granite, drums beating like a slow heart. Beneath the stone, there may have been chambers, tight corridors, echoing halls, where candidates were led into controlled darkness, tested for courage, silence, and the ability to hold a single thought while fear whispered from every wall. Now imagine it is you. Your eyes are blindfolded. Sand crunches under your bare feet as priests guide you forward. The air cools. The sound changes. You feel, rather than see, the massive pause on either side. Voices rise around you in a low chant, hymns to the hidden sun traveling through the underworld. You have been warned. One wrong word, one uncontrolled outburst of fear could end your candidacy on the spot. Most importantly, the goal of all this was not just power on earth. It was mastery of the passage through death itself. To become an Ak, an effective spirit, able to pass the gates of the duat, stand before judgment, and return as a luminous being among the imperishable stars. What kind of knowledge could promise that? And if the Sphinx was the outer gate of that school, what lies in the chambers it still conceals beneath its pores? We'll find out together in the next layer of this mystery. A geologist walks into the enclosure. To answer that, we have to bring in someone who does not care about myths or mystery schools at all. A man who reads rocks the way priests read sacred texts. In the early 1990s, a Boston University geologist named Robert Schoch walked down into the Sphinx enclosure, and the stones told him a story Egyptology had already decided could not be true. Did you know that by then, the age of the Sphinx was considered settled? Most of us grew up hearing the same line. It was carved around 2500 BCE, in the time of Pharaoh Khafre, as a kind of guardian statue for his pyramid complex. Case closed. But what really happened when a geologist, not an Egyptologist, stepped between those ancient walls? Imagine standing where he stood. The Sphinx's body rises ahead, but what surrounds it is even stranger. Towering limestone walls, cut down into the native bedrock, curving around the monument like a sunken courtyard. Those walls are not crisp. They are deeply scalloped, with rounded vertical channels, soft, undulating waves of stone. They look less like rock sandblasted by desert winds and more like sea cliffs or canyon walls that have been rained on for thousands of years. Schoch knew the language of erosion. Wind and sand carve sharp edges, undercut corners, crisp ledges. Rain does something different. It eats into the face of the stone, creating vertical runnels and smoothed, bulging profiles. As he traced those channels with his eyes, he realized he was not looking at a few centuries of bad weather. he was looking at prolonged, heavy rainfall. But the Giza Plateau has not seen that kind of climate since long before Khafre. According to the stories written in Earth's own layers, Egypt shifted from a wetter world to the arid Sahara thousands of years earlier. Schoch's conclusion, stated in careful academic language, was explosive. The core body of the Sphinx and its enclosure might date back to 7,000, 5,000 BCE, or even earlier, into a time before the official beginning of Egyptian civilization. To make the anomaly clearer, he and others compared the Sphinx enclosure to nearby Old Kingdom tombs and temples. Those later monuments, securely dated to Khafre and his neighbors, show the desert's signature: angular, flaking blocks, sharp corners, surfaces chewed by wind, not washed by water. Side by side, the contrast is unmistakable. One landscape looks like a drowned world remembered in stone. The other, a dry, sand-scoured necropolis. If that reading is correct, then something profound shifts. It means the body of the Sphinx was already ancient when the pyramids were new. It means the pharaohs and priests of the Old Kingdom were not the original builders, but inheritors, caretakers of a sanctuary they did not fully understand, performing rituals in chambers whose first purpose was already a mystery. Old legends tell a different story about such places. They speak of a first time, a forgotten age when the gods walked with humanity. What kind of knowledge survived from that era, buried in stone and guarded by a lion-faced sentinel? And most importantly, if later mystery schools trained initiates at a gate they did not build, whose teachings were they really passing on? We'll find out together as we follow the trail of clues the priests tried to hide in plain sight. Rain on a desert lion. To follow that trail, we have to pull the camera back, far back. Imagine North Africa not as an endless desert, but as a living, breathing green world. Did you know that for thousands of years, the Sahara was a land of lakes, rivers, and savannas? Seasonal monsoon rains swept up from the south, turning what is now bare rock and sand into grasslands filled with hippos, crocodiles, and herds of grazing animals. Climatologists call it the African humid period. It began after the last ice age and slowly faded between about 7,000 and 3,000 BCE. During that time, vast lakes spread across the desert. Shorelines left ring marks on plateaus. Ancient shore sediments still hold the mud of vanished waters. When researchers drill cores into those old lake beds, they pull up a layered memory: pollen from trees and grasses, algae from freshwater blooms, even traces of changing wind and rain. Those cores tell a simple story. North Africa was once wet. Then the gates closed. The monsoons weakened. The rains retreated south, and the Sahara dried into the desert we recognize today. But what really happened on the Giza Plateau while the climate was shifting from green to gold? And why does the Sphinx seem to remember rain that the official timeline says should never have touched it? Look again at the enclosure that cradles the Sphinx. The walls are deeply scalloped, carved into rounded vertical channels and undulating profiles. Geologists like Robert Schoch argue this is the fingerprint of heavy, prolonged rainfall running down those cliffs, not just wind and sand gnawing at them. If that diagnosis is right, then the original carving must reach back into that wetter window when violent seasonal storms still crashed over Giza. Here is the tension. Mainstream history tells us that around 7,000, 3000 BCE, Egypt was home to scattered Neolithic villages, simple farming communities along a more modest Nile. No pharaohs, no stone temples, no mystery schools, yet the rock itself hints that someone was already cutting a colossal lion-bodied guardian straight out of the plateau. The climate data backs up the scene. Fossil pollen from Nile delta cores shows dense vegetation where there is now dust. Across the central Sahara, rock art captures giraffes, elephants, cattle, and hunters walking through grasslands under open skies. These painted panels are like snapshots from a forgotten documentary, all pointing to a greener epoch. If the Sphinx's earliest wounds match that age, then Giza once looked out over a very different world. So who needed a monument of that scale in a landscape of lakes and savannas? What kind of knowledge, what kind of rituals demanded a permanent stone sentinel watching the eastern horizon? If a lion-bodied guardian already stood there during or just after the rains, then its builders had organizational power, engineering skill, and a shared vision to rival later pharaohs. Yet their names are missing. Their schools are silent. Their chambers, if they exist, remain hidden. We are left with an unsettling choice. Either the geology is wrong, or our timeline of when complex societies emerged is incomplete. Which possibility do you find harder to believe? And what happens to our story of human origins if the lion in the sand is telling the truth? The face that doesn't fit. But what if the Sphinx is hiding an even stranger secret right in plain sight? Look at it with fresh eyes. A vast elongated lion's body, 73 meters of stone muscle and paws stretching toward the horizon, crowned with a head that looks almost delicate. The skull is small, the neck narrow, the features tight and compressed, as if the face does not quite belong to the body that carries it. Did you know many artists and engineers have noticed that the proportions feel wrong, as though the original design has been cut down, trimmed, and forced into a new identity? This is where the recarving hypothesis enters the mystery. According to the stories told by some researchers, the Sphinx did not always wear a human face. They argue that the monument began as a full lion, with a larger, more massive leonine head projecting from the limestone bedrock. Over time, that ancient head may have been damaged by erosion, by deliberate defacement, or by the slow collapse of the outer layers. Then, in dynastic times, a pharaoh's sculptors returned to this wounded guardian and reshaped the surviving core into a royal portrait, perhaps of Khafre. If that is true, then the current head is not the beginning of the story. It is a repair, a claim, a later dynasty literally putting its own face onto a monument that was already ancient when the Giza pyramids were new. But what really happened on that ledge of stone, and how can we tell? The clues are written in the weathering. The body and enclosure walls show deep rounded channels, carved by heavy rainfall, pouring down for thousands of years in a climate very different from today's desert. Yet the head and upper neck do not share the same dramatic erosion. Their surface is rough, but the deep vertical scalloping seen along the body is muted, as though these features were exposed to the elements for a much shorter time, or reshaped long after the original lion had already endured ages of storms. This mismatch in decay is a quiet but powerful pattern interrupt. We are not looking at a single unified monument, frozen in one era. We are looking at a palimpsest, an older sacred lion, possibly aligned with the constellation Leo at dawn, later overwritten by human hands. Imagine that first form, a pure lion facing the eastern horizon, the living symbol of a celestial gate, guarding the place where the sun and the stars rose together. Then imagine a pharaoh arriving, claiming that ancient guardian by imprinting his own royal visage onto it. What kind of knowledge did those later priests inherit when they refaced the lion? And most importantly, if the Sphinx carries at least two identities in one body, how many forgotten builders and lost schools of wisdom are still written beneath its paws? We'll find out together as we follow the trail under the sand, into the hidden chambers many believe still wait below. When the Sphinx saw its own reflection in the sky, to follow that trail, we have to lift our eyes from the sand to the sky. Did you know the Sphinx is not only aligned with the rising sun, but with a much slower, deeper motion of the heavens that unfolds over tens of thousands of years? Imagine the Earth not as a still, perfect top, but as one that slowly wobbles. Over about 26,000 years, our planet's axis traces a great circle in space. This gentle wobble is called the precession of the equinoxes. It means that at dawn on the spring equinox, the backdrop of stars behind the rising sun does not stay fixed. Age after age, the sun rises in front of a different constellation: Taurus, Aries, Pisces, Aquarius, and so on, like a cosmic clock hand sweeping through the zodiac. For thousands of years, priests watched this slow motion turning. They were not just watching for omens. They were tracking time on a scale that makes empires look like sparks. According to the stories, they encoded this hidden cycle into their temples, rituals, and myths of the afterlife. Now imagine standing between the paws of the Sphinx around 10,500 BCE. The air is cooler, the Nile Valley greener, the Sahara not yet the desert we know. It is dawn on the spring equinox. The eastern horizon begins to glow. As the first ray of sunlight breaks, a particular constellation rises directly in front of the Sphinx's gaze: Leo, the celestial lion. A lion-bodied guardian on Earth, watching a lion-shaped pattern of stars ascend from the horizon, its own form reflected in the sky. This is the key claim of the 10,500 BCE alignment theory. The Sphinx, facing due east, is not random. It is a stone pointer, aimed at the moment when the age of Leo ruled the dawn. Old legends tell a different story about Zep Tepi, the first time, a golden age when gods and divine kings walked the earth. Some researchers argue that the Sphinx is a monument to that age, a memory anchor set to that specific celestial configuration. And the Sphinx is not alone. Just behind it rise the three great pyramids of Giza. When we look at their layout from above, something strange appears. Their staggered arrangement mirrors the three belt stars of Orion. Not as they look today, but as they would have appeared around that same 10,500 BCE window. Ground and sky, plateau and constellation, locked together. This Orion correlation idea is controversial. Many scholars reject the dates, the pattern, the very notion that such precise star temple mapping was possible so early. But what really happened on that plateau, Is it coincidence that a lion faces Leo while pyramids echo Orion, the ancient god of resurrection, as if the entire site is a frozen star map pointing to a single first time? If the Sphinx is not just a monument, but a clock set to 10,500 BCE, then who were the timekeepers? What kind of knowledge did they guard in their hidden schools and chambers, watching the ages turn? Most importantly, what message were they trying to send across the flood of time? To us, we'll find out together as we descend from the stars back into the stone and into the rituals that may have been practiced in the shadow of this cosmic lion. Under the pores, chambers, voids, and whispers. To reach those rituals in the shadow of the cosmic lion, we have to go somewhere almost no visitor ever sees. Not up the monument, but under it. Because beneath those famous pores, the ground itself has started whispering. Since the late 20th century, teams have brought new kinds of X-ray vision to the Giza plateau. Ground-penetrating radar sends pulses into the earth and listens for echoes from denser or emptier layers. Seismic surveys tap the rock and measure how vibrations slow down or speed up. When the signals change, it usually means one thing: a hidden cavity, a cut in the bedrock, a place where someone has been before. Did you know that those instruments have lit up around the Sphinx like a quiet alarm? Multiple surveys have reported anomalies directly beneath and in front of the pores, zones where the bedrock suddenly drops away or rings hollow. Linear features trace faint paths that look very much like tunnels. Some voids form rectangles, as if they were once deliberate chambers carved with purpose, not random cracks in the limestone. Official reports tend to describe them in dry language: subsurface discontinuities, low-density zones. But old legends tell a different story. Late temple traditions speak of secret archives guarded by lion-headed beings. In the 20th century, esoteric schools revived that idea as the Hall of Records, a vast library said to hold knowledge from a pre-dynastic, even pre-cataclysmic age. According to the stories, when the last great flood came, priests sealed their scrolls beneath the Sphinx, trusting the stone guardian to watch over them until a future time. On the surface, we can trace the visible ritual complex. The Sphinx sits in its carved enclosure, facing east. Just in front lies the Sphinx Temple, built from the very blocks cut from around the body. To the side, the massive valley Temple of Khafre anchors the plateau, linked by a long causeway that climbs toward the pyramid like a ceremonial road. This is not random architecture. It feels like a planned journey from the river's edge, through the Valley Temple, past the Sphinx Temple, and finally under the gaze of the lion itself. Now imagine that process mirrored below ground. Initiates led through narrow passages, descending into cool darkness, chambers where torches flicker on polished stone. Priests reciting sacred names as candidates symbolically die, pass through invisible gates, and are reborn into the mystery schools of the afterlife. What kind of knowledge would require a labyrinth like that, half in daylight, half buried in the earth? But what really happened under those pores remains blocked behind more than stone. Most importantly, the very zones where radar and seismic tests hint at voids are also the areas most tightly controlled. No full excavation has been allowed, no public descent into those anomalies. we are left with measurements, diagrams, and a literal and symbolic void beneath the Sphinx. So are those empty spaces just geological quirks, or the last sealed classrooms of a forgotten school? For thousands of years, the answer has stayed underground. In the next part, we follow the clues into the temples themselves and into rituals that may reveal what was once taught in the shadow of the lion and perhaps beneath it. Why bury the first civilization? So are those empty spaces just geological quirks, or the last sealed classrooms of a forgotten school? For thousands of years, the answer has stayed underground. But if the Sphinx really remembers a lost age, another question rises that is even stranger. Not just how old is the Sphinx, but why hide the age at all? Why would anyone carve a message into living rock, align it with the stars, anchor it to the Nile's shifting sky clock, and then bury its meaning under myth, oath, and silence? What kind of knowledge is worth that much trouble? Did you know that in Egypt, memory itself was treated like a dangerous force? The priests guarded origin stories the way others guarded gold. Old legends tell a different story than simple desert kings and tombs. They whisper about a Zep Tepi, a first time when gods and luminous beings walked with humans, when the sky and earth moved in different rhythms. If the Sphinx truly watched that era end, maybe its builders were not just honoring it, maybe they were quarantining it. Imagine a civilization that had already learned to track the slow wobble of Earth's axis, watching constellations slide like gears across thousands of years. According to the stories, they saw ages rise and fall under different star guardians. If the Sphinx once faced its own reflection in Leo at dawn, it would have been a stone witness to a full cosmic cycle. What if they discovered that certain alignments brought not just floods and climate shifts, but upheavals of consciousness itself? In that case, the dangerous knowledge is not just about rocks and rain. It is about timing, about when worlds reset, about how human minds open or break under pressure from the sky. So the guardians of that memory might decide, this cannot be written plainly. It must be turned into ritual. Ritual is a filter. It means only those willing to train, to confront fear in dark chambers and symbolic deaths, can approach the core of the story. The mystery schools become both library and firewall. The myths of Osiris, torn apart and reassembled. The journeys through the Duat's 12 gates. The weighing of the heart against Ma'at's feather. These are not bedtime tales. They are encrypted reports from those who lived through something the later pharaohs could barely imagine. Most importantly, secrecy preserves power. If only a narrow chain of priests holds the keys to how the world really began and how it will end, they control not just religion, but history and destiny. To speak openly of the first time might invite panic, or worse, imitation. So we circle back to that burning question. What did they learn in that first time? What did they fear so deeply that they swore never to speak of it, except in star maps and stone corridors? And what kind of oaths did the keepers of the Sphinx take, knowing that one careless word could crack the spell of forgetting? To even approach those answers, we have to step inside their worldview, not as tourists peeking at myths, but as would-be initiates entering a training ground for the afterlife. The Sphinx, the pyramids, the underground passages, they become more than monuments. They become a curriculum. Up to now, we have followed outer evidence, erosion lines, astronomical alignments, hidden voids. In the next part, we cross an invisible threshold. From stone to soul, we'll find out together how Egyptian beliefs about the duat, the judgment of the heart, and the rituals of the mystery schools might explain why the first civilization was not just forgotten, but deliberately buried in silence. The duat, a map of the invisible. To the Egyptians, the invisible was not vague or abstract. It was mapped. They called it the duat. Most of us grew up thinking of the afterlife as a simple up or down choice, heaven or hell, light or darkness. But old legends tell a different story. The duat was not a single place. It was a vast, layered realm beneath and beyond the visible world. A night river the sun god Ra sailed through every evening, a hidden landscape of gates, guardians, and tests that every soul would one day have to face. Imagine the sky going dark over Giza. The sun seems to vanish, but according to the stories, it has only slipped into another dimension. There, in the duat, Ra's boat glides through 12 regions for 12 hours of the night. Each hour is its own world, caverns dripping with underground water, narrow tunnels coiled with serpents, lakes of fire that glow like molten copper, and quiet fields of reeds that look almost like Egypt, but sharper, brighter, more real. Did you know these hours were described almost like levels in a cosmic initiation? In every region, gates block the way. Each gate has a name. Each gate has a guardian. Some are human-faced, some are animal-headed, some are pure symbol. Knives, flames, coils of darkness. To pass, the traveling soul must speak correctly. The name of the gate, the name of the guardian, the precise spell that proves it carries true knowledge, not confusion. This is where the stakes become clear. For thousands of years, Egyptians believed death was not an automatic ascent, but a dangerous journey. A soul that wandered without guidance could be trapped, attacked, or simply lost in the maze. To reach the field of reeds, to stand among the imperishable stars and live as an Ak, a shining one, you had to be prepared. You had to know the passwords. You had to remember the rituals. So where did that preparation happen? In the mystery schools. In secret chambers under temples and pyramids, priests trained pharaohs and initiates to walk the duat before their bodies ever died. The earliest scripts for this journey are carved inside the Old Kingdom pyramids. The pyramid texts, dense columns of utterances meant to launch a king's soul into the night. Later, the coffin texts spread this knowledge to nobles, painting spells on the very boxes that would hold their bodies. Most importantly, these writings evolved into what we call the Book of the Dead, known in Egypt as the Book of Coming Forth by Day. Not a single book, but a customizable toolkit of spells, maps, and dialogues. A soul stands before a gate. A guardian demands, "Who are you? What is my name?" Speak wrongly, and the way slams shut. Speak the secret formula, and the duat itself opens. Now look again at the Sphinx, a lion-bodied, human-headed guardian frozen at the threshold of the plateau, staring toward the rising sun. It is the same question carved in stone. Are we ready? Do we know the path? Have we trained for the underworld while still breathing? Or will the duat be our first and final exam. In the next part, we follow those who claimed they could pass that exam at will, the initiates who learned to send their consciousness into the duat and return. Zep Tepi, memories of the first time. Those initiates said they were not inventing this journey. They were reenacting something that had happened once before, in an age the Egyptians called Zep Tepi, the first time. Did you know that phrase appears again and again on temple walls? Zep Tepi was not just long ago. It was a golden age when, according to the stories, gods and semi-divine beings walked openly among humans. In that first time, the cosmic order called Ma'at was said to have been set down on Earth for the very first time. Laws of harmony, balance, and right action woven into the fabric of daily life like invisible architecture. Mainstream Egyptology treats this as mythic prehistory, a poetic way to say, in the beginning. In that reading, Zep Tepi is a sacred story, not a date on a timeline. But old legends tell a different story. Mystery school traditions, hermetic texts, and some alternative researchers insist that Zep Tepi was a blurred cultural memory of an actual, earlier high civilization, one that may have mastered the very same underworld journeys the later priests rehearsed in their hidden chambers. Those priests were clear about one thing: their knowledge was inherited. Temple inscriptions and later Greek accounts repeat the claim that the wisdom of Egypt was not created by the pharaohs of the Nile, but received from the first time and passed down through an unbroken chain of initiates. The schools of Egypt were guardians, not authors. They wrapped this inheritance in symbols, animal-headed gods, ritual dramas, and star maps, so that only the trained could read the older language buried underneath. But what really happened at the edge of that first time? Egyptian texts hint at floods, sudden darkness, and the overthrow of a previous order. Other ancient traditions, from Mesopotamia to Plato's story of Atlantis, speak of rising seas and shattered cities. Modern geology adds its own whisper, evidence of abrupt climate shifts and massive meltwater floods around the end of the last ice age, close to that mysterious 10,500 BCE window. Now place the Sphinx on that stage, a lion-bodied guardian, aligned due east, staring at the horizon where, around 10,500 BCE, the constellation of Leo rose at dawn. Its body is deeply scarred by vertical weathering that geologists like Robert Scotch argue matches heavy rainfall, not desert wind. That would push its original carving back into a wetter, much older Sahara, perhaps even into the twilight of Zep Tepi itself. If that is true, then the Sphinx is more than a monument. It is the last surviving witness of the first time, a stone archive whose language is geometry, orientation, and silence. But what kind of record did it keep? And what did the priests hide beneath its pores, in those rumored sealed chambers that may still hold the lost curriculum of a forgotten world? Training for death before you die. For thousands of years, people have looked at the Sphinx and seen a monument to death, a guardian of tombs, a silent watcher over the graves of kings. But what if that is only half the story? What if this guardian was also a teacher, and the Giza Plateau was a school where the elite learned to die before they actually died? Did you know that, according to the stories, the most advanced initiates were not content to wait for the afterlife to test their fate in the duat. Old legends tell a different story. They say pharaohs and chosen students of the mystery schools rehearsed the journey while still alive, entering controlled, ritualized states that imitated the terror and wonder of the underworld. Darkness, isolation, symbolic dismemberment, and then, if they passed, a carefully guided rebirth. In this hidden curriculum, everyone had a role. The pharaoh was not just a king, he was the living Horus, the one who would one day become Osiris, Lord of the Dead. Around him stood high priests, trained psychopomps, soul guides, who knew the gates, the guardians, and the passwords of the duat by heart. And then there were the initiates, a small circle of candidates who hoped to join the Aku, the shining ones, those rare beings who had mastered the journey and could move between worlds with knowledge instead of fear. But what really happened in this training? It was not vague meditation. It was technical, precise. Initiates memorized long sequences of spells and names from texts we now call the Book of the Dead, and from even older writings preserved in temple archives. They learned the geography of the duat the way a navigator learns a coastline: caverns, rivers, fire lakes, and the 12 gates of night. Most importantly, they internalized a strict logic, encounter, correct response, safe passage, make a mistake, speak the wrong name, and in their imagination, the gate stayed shut. Now imagine Giza at night. No tourists, no floodlights, only starlight on stone. An initiate is led down through a hidden passage near the Sphinx into a subterranean chamber carved deep into the bedrock. The door seals, total darkness. The outside world disappears. No horizon, no sky, only a voice, the priest reciting scenes of the duat, serpents coiling in flaming pools, gates guarded by beings who demand exact phrases. The initiate lies motionless, deprived of sight and sound, heart pounding, rehearsing the answers that mean survival. This is not a story about death later. This is death now, simulated, structured, and reversible. Here, the architecture itself becomes part of the ritual. Narrow tunnels compress the body. Low ceilings force the head to bow. Chambers tuned to strange resonances turn a single chant into a wall of sound that vibrates through bone and blood. This is what kind of knowledge these schools protected, a way of using stone, sound, and ordeal to carve a map of the invisible directly into the nervous system. But if the Sphinx complex was the stage for these living dramas, where did this system come from? And how far back does it really go? We'll find out together when we follow the trail into even older layers beneath Giza's familiar story, through 12 gates of night. To find that source, we have to follow the path the Egyptians themselves described, a journey through 12 gates of night. Did you know they imagined the afterlife not as a vague cloud realm, but as a tightly structured course, hour by hour, gate by gate, like a cosmic curriculum that never stopped testing you? In their underworld books, the duat unfolds in a rhythm. Each region is an hour of the night. Each hour ends in a gate. At every gate, a guardian waits. The pattern repeats with almost mechanical precision. Approach, confrontation, declaration, passage. It is as if the universe itself had office hours, and the soul had to keep its appointments. According to the stories, the encounter always follows a formula. A towering figure or a coiled serpent appears, blocking the way. It demands a name, a title, a secret. The soul must respond with exact words. I know you. I know your name. I know the name of your gate. Then comes a spell, a phrase, a tightly crafted declaration of identity and purpose. Only when spoken perfectly does the gate swing open and the journey move forward. This was not symbolic poetry to them. In Egyptian thought, the cosmos was woven from names. Mispronounce a name, forget a line, hesitate on a syllable. And the guardian did not just frown, it attacked. For thousands of years, priests and initiates drilled these formulas in temple schools, repeating them in dark chambers until the tongue and the nervous system could fire them off under pressure, even in a state of terror. The 12 gates become a spine holding the whole underworld together. One gate stands before a lake of fire, where the soul must know the spell that turns raging flames into harmless light so it can cross. Another is guarded by a serpent whose coils encircle the passage. Only by reciting its hidden titles, sometimes 3, sometimes 7, can the coils loosen. At yet another, decapitating demons raise knives, ready to sever the head from the spirit body, unless each demon's secret name is called out, neutralizing it like a code word, shutting down a weapon. Old legends tell a different story about these scenes than the tourist brochures. They hint that what we read on papyrus is only the public syllabus. Most importantly, the real training was oral, embodied, and guarded. The written spells were like sheet music. The mystery schools held the living performance, tone, pacing, breath, the inner visualization that turned sound into power. So what kind of knowledge are we really seeing here? Mythology, or the remnants of a precise spiritual technology? And if this curriculum of the night was already in place, who first walked it under the gaze of the Sphinx? We'll find out together when we trace these 12 gates back to a time when Giza's stone lion may have watched an even older civilization rise and fall. The Sphinx as first gatekeeper. To answer that, we have to go back to the sand-blasted pores of the Sphinx and look at it with new eyes. Not as a broken monument in a tourist photo, but as the first gatekeeper of an invisible journey. In the duat, the soul meets guardians only after death. But what if the first question of the underworld was asked here, in daylight, before a single temple door opened? Standing before that immense stone face, initiates would have felt the same pressure as a soul before a gate. Who are you? Are you prepared to enter? Did you know that in Egypt, identity was not just a name, but a whole alignment of heart, mind, and intention? The Sphinx's body makes this lesson impossible to ignore. A lion stretched along the Giza bedrock, with the head of a human rising from its shoulders. Animal strength fused with conscious awareness, claws dug into the earth, yet the gaze fixed on the rising sun. It is a teaching image in stone, telling us that brute force alone cannot pass the gates. Only a disciplined, awakened mind riding on the power of the body can survive the hidden tests ahead. So how would the mystery schools have used this first threshold? Old legends tell a different story than simple royal propaganda. According to the stories, pharaohs and priests approached from the west in darkness, moving along the causeways before dawn, torches low, drums slow, the massive silhouette of the Sphinx barely visible against the stars. Then, as the first light of the sun broke on the horizon, its face ignited in gold. The procession would cross from shadow into that sudden blaze, reciting declarations of identity, much like the negative confessions of the afterlife. I have not lied. My heart is light. Most importantly, this was not just poetry. Imagine standing in front of that colossal guardian while elders watched in silence, questions spoken, oaths demanded, perhaps even ordeals of heat, cold, or isolation in nearby chambers, acting as a symbolic weighing of the heart. No scales, no feather of Ma'at, but the same principle. Is the inner state balanced enough to step beyond the first gate? This is where the idea of walking the duat while alive becomes concrete. The Sphinx marks the outermost edge of a living underworld curriculum. Past that first silent examination, and the journey continues through temple gateways, descending corridors, and narrow shafts that mimic the duat's tunnels. Each doorway, another gate. Each chamber, another test. Each altered state of consciousness, another night sea crossing. But if the Sphinx is only the beginning, where are the rest of the gates? What kind of knowledge did the whole plateau encode? Some researchers suspect that the pyramids, their internal shafts, and even yet unopened chambers form a three-dimensional map of the duat itself, a training ground in stone. If that is true, then Giza is not just a cemetery. It is a complete underworld school. And if this is only the first gate, what waits at the last one? Buried in the heart of the Great Pyramid, echoes in other mystery traditions. If Giza is an underworld school, then here's a strange question. Why do echoes of the same training appear far from Egypt, in places that never saw the Nile? Did you know that in ancient Greece, people whispered about their own hidden gates to the afterlife? At Eleusis, near Athens, thousands of initiates walked into secret night-long rituals called the Eleusinian Mysteries. On the surface, it was a festival for Demeter and Persephone. But old legends tell a different story. According to the stories, chosen participants were blindfolded, led through darkness, and confronted with symbolic death. They fasted, drank a special brew, and entered underground chambers where torches suddenly blazed, revealing sacred objects and a vision of rebirth. Those who passed through swore that death no longer terrified them. It was not just worship, it was training. The pattern becomes even clearer when we look at the Orphic and Pythagorean schools. Archaeologists have found tiny golden tablets buried with initiates, thin as leaves, inscribed with instructions for the soul. They tell the dead which springs to avoid, which to drink from, and exactly what to say when guardians of the underworld demand their name. I am a child of earth and starry heaven. One tablet has the initiate declare. This sounds very close to Egyptian spells and name lists for the duat, where priests memorized precise words to open gates and move past fearsome beings. So what kind of knowledge were all these cultures protecting? In Mesopotamia, the goddess Inanna descends through 7 gates into the land of the dead, stripped of her jewelry and power at each level. Then hangs lifeless on a hook. Only later is she raised and allowed to return. For thousands of years, people repeated this story as ritual drama. A divine figure walks down, is unmade, then rises transformed. It is the same core journey: descent, ordeal, and a dangerous passage back to the light. This is our pattern interrupt. We step away from Egypt, only to find Egypt everywhere. From Greek theatres to Sumerian tablets, ancient cultures built schools of the underworld, using myths, rituals, and carefully designed spaces. Most importantly, they used these tools to rehearse the afterlife while still alive. Seen in this wider mirror, Egypt's mystery schools may be the oldest and most architecturally explicit version of a global design. Instead of only telling a story, they carved the story into stone. Pyramids, shafts, and hidden chambers became a three-dimensional script the body could walk through. Now, when we turn back to the Sphinx, it no longer stands alone. It joins a family of initiatory symbols that guard the threshold between worlds. But this guardian may be the eldest of them all, carved when the Sahara was still green, watching as later civilizations rediscovered the same timeless journey and built their own gates to match it. And if this is the elder, what forgotten school once stood at its feet, walking the plateau as an initiate? So now, imagine we go back, not as tourists with cameras, but as initiates being led through a hidden curriculum. The Sphinx no longer stands alone on a dusty plateau. It becomes the heart of a ritual landscape, a three-dimensional map of the underworld carved into stone. Our journey begins at the edge of the Nile, at the Valley Temple. From the outside, it looks almost like a bunker dropped from the sky. Massive granite blocks weighing tens of tons each, locked together with eerie precision. Inside, the air feels heavy. The walls are bare, almost shockingly austere. No bright painted scenes, no comforting stories, just cool stone, dim light, and silence. What kind of knowledge is taught in a place like this? Here, according to the stories, the first step was purification. Cloaks, titles, and ordinary identity were stripped away. In the mystery schools, this might have been where pharaohs and priests symbolically died to their old lives. Did you know some researchers believe these stark chambers were designed to unsettle the senses, to empty the mind before the real journey began? From that temple, we step onto the causeway, a long, rising corridor connecting Nile-side rituals to the high plateau. Parts of it are open to the blazing Egyptian sky. Other stretches would have felt enclosed, shadowed, almost tunnel-like. It is a liminal path, neither fully outside nor fully inside. Daylight fades, shadow grows. It mirrors the sun's descent from the western horizon into the first hours of night in the Duat. Can you picture a procession here? Torches flickering against stone, chants echoing along the walls. For thousands of years, the sun's daily journey into darkness was reenacted in temple rituals. This causeway may have been a moving stage where initiates walked the line between worlds, rehearsing the passage through the first gates of the afterlife. At the end of this corridor, the guardian waits. We emerge between the paws of the Sphinx, standing in the hollow of its gaze. Above us, the lion body stretches back toward the plateau. Below us, geophysical surveys hint at hidden anomalies, possible chambers sealed beneath the bedrock. Old legends tell a different story about this place, that secret halls lie under the Sphinx, where initiates faced tests of fear and darkness. Most importantly, this is the threshold, the gatekeeper. Here the initiate proves readiness to go on. Beyond, the land tilts upward toward the pyramids. Most of us grew up believing they were only tombs for pharaohs. But what really happened inside these layered stone mountains? Their internal shafts point to specific stars. Their ascending and descending passages form vertical and horizontal axes, like a cross-section of the soul's journey. The burial chambers at their core feel less like coffins and more like stone wombs, resonant, enclosed, aligned to the heavens. If the valley temple stripped identity away, the pyramids may have completed the cycle: death, judgment, and rebirth into a higher state. And beneath our feet, the mystery deepens. Subsurface anomalies, rumored tunnels, and unexplored cavities suggest that what we see on the surface is only half the design. Imagine a labyrinth of hidden chambers running under the Sphinx and plateau, connecting Valley Temple, Guardian, and pyramids into one vast initiatory machine. If this whole complex was a training ground for the afterlife, what were the final exams like? And what traces of that forbidden curriculum might still be hidden in the stone, waiting for us to read it? What the old lion still guards. If the whole plateau was an initiatory machine, then the Sphinx is its face, its question, its gate. Think about what that means. We have geological scars on the enclosure walls that look like long ages of heavy rain, not just desert wind. We have a climate record saying Giza was much wetter thousands of years before the classic pharaohs. We have a body with deep, rounded erosion, and a head that seems too small, too crisp, as if an older lion was recarved into a pharaoh's portrait. Did you know this alone hints at a timeline where the Sphinx was already ancient, when the pyramids were new? Old legends tell a different story than the neat textbook version. They speak of a Zep Tepi, a first time when gods and shining beings walked with early kings. According to the stories, priests carried memories of that age like a fragile flame, passing it through their hidden schools and rituals. Then there is the sky. When we roll processional astronomy backward, something uncanny happens. Around 10,500 BCE, the Sphinx would have watched the dawn and seen the constellation Leo rising directly in front of it. A lion of stone staring at a lion of stars. The three great pyramids echoing the belt of Orion. The whole plateau turning into a star map, a mirror of the heavens frozen in limestone. Put these threads together and a clear, if controversial, proposition emerges. The Sphinx may be far older than we thought, a survivor from an earlier high culture whose name has been erased. Dynastic Egypt, brilliant as it was, may have inherited this monument and wrapped it in its own language of the duat, of judgment halls and afterlife gates. The guardian of a forgotten world becomes the centerpiece of their mystery school training, the threshold every initiate must symbolically face. Not everyone agrees, of course. Many scholars insist the standard timeline holds, that all of this can be explained by known history, by wind erosion, by coincidence, in the stars. Others, from geologists like Robert Schoch to alternative researchers, argue that the anomalies are too many, the fit too tight to ignore. But what really happened? What kind of knowledge are we brushing against when we stand between those pores? Most importantly, what does it mean for us if the Sphinx has already watched at least one civilization rise, flourish, and vanish. For thousands of years, it has stared across a changing Nile, through floods and droughts, through conquest and forgetting. It has seen libraries burn, languages die, and yet some pattern continues, like a heartbeat under the sand. Maybe that is the real initiation. Beyond dates and arguments, the old lion seems to whisper the same lesson given to ancient priests. Remember who you are. Prepare for the journey. Live as if consciousness matters beyond this single lifetime. But if the Sphinx is a gatekeeper, then what, exactly, is it guarding now? And who is it still waiting for to answer its riddle? Your invitation from the first time. If the Sphinx is a gatekeeper, then what, exactly, is it guarding now? And who is it still waiting for to answer its riddle? Picture the first frame of this journey again. The Sphinx at dawn. The sky still blue-grey, the air cold, the first band of gold rising over the eastern horizon. For thousands of years, that lion body and human face have watched the same sun climb the same path. It has seen floods, invasions, forgotten rituals, and silent nights when no incense burned. If this being has watched 10,000 years of human forgetting, what will it see in you? Did you know that, according to the stories, initiates once approached this place as a threshold, not a tourist site? They came as candidates, not spectators. Tonight, this video has been an echo of that. Not just information, a first gate. The beginning of your own mystery school, where dead stones turn into living questions about consciousness, death, and purpose. So ask yourself, when you look at the Sphinx now, do you only see eroded limestone, or do you sense a hidden curriculum, geology that hints at rains from another age, star alignments that whisper of the Lion of Leo facing its own reflection in the sky, underworld training that used dark chambers and silence as tools, the same way modern labs use machines? What kind of knowledge were the pharaohs and priests guarding here? Most importantly, which part of this mystery is calling you? The weathered enclosure walls that challenge the textbook timeline. The idea of star temples mapping the heavens onto the desert. The thought of initiates lying in narrow passages, rehearsing their journey through the duat, gate by gate. Share it. Tell us in the comments which thread pulls at you the most, and add your own interpretation. Let this channel become a modern temple of discussion, a place where different minds bring their own offerings to the altar of the unknown. Because this is only the first gate, old legends tell a different story about Egypt's sacred sites, and we'll find out together how deep it goes. Next, we will walk into other initiatory schools, the Osirian at Abydos, where drowned halls and rose granite hint at a technology of resurrection. The Serapeum, with its impossible granite sarcophagi waiting in the dark. The hidden shafts of the Great Pyramid, where sound, breath, and stillness may have trained the soul for the afterlife. But what really happened in those chambers? Why were these rituals buried under tons of stone and guarded by oaths of silence? Perhaps the answer is not only in the past. Perhaps it is in how you listen now. The old lion keeps its secrets, but it never stops asking the question. If you have heard it tonight, you are already on the path. Walk it with us, subscribe, stay close, and we will go further into the duat together.